What's going? OMG and E Street. I hope she does that one dance move. Oh man, I don't. I'm too tired today, Plexi. You won. It's nice to be friendly. I've been. Oh fuck. Okay. Wait. What's going on? You're not unattractive, bro. I don't. It's not that, bro. It's just that I don't. Okay, we're gonna just stop the conversation here. Otherwise, it's gonna be cringe. But you're not what I'm looking for. Wait, bro, what? It's nice to be friendly. I've been pretty confused for a while about you, bro. Okay, enough. It isn't it one point you're like outputting yourself with cost and jogging and sportswear, and then you send us these. I'm your best friend, but you're what I'm looking. What? Bro, why would you send me that? Dude, your rank just tanked from like B plus to like a D minus. What is going on? Bro, all he said was like, you're chill. No, I'm talking to, wait, hang on. I'm talking to RDXY. Oh, fuck. Did you guys see this motherfucker wrote a whole ass like paragraph, I swear. Oh my god, because all I said was like, oh, you're chill, you know, you don't gotta worry about me putting you on the bad tier list. He made a fan, bro, exactly. What the fuck, dude? Look, it's nice to be friendly. I've been confused for a while about you. Bro, what are you confused about, bro? Don't spend it. What are you trying to figure out, bro? What is this? Motherfucker, oh no, my rank. Dude, what is this? Genuinely. See, this is why I can't tell you motherfuckers anything, you know? Because I'm just trying to vibe and I'm like, you know, I care about you guys because it's just like I'm a person and I'm like, oh, that's chill that they watch me and they also give me money from time to time. That's important, you know, like, but like, bro, what is all of this, bro? Can you? He's writing in erotica. It's not a calculus problem. Exactly, bro. Bro is imagining his life with you. Bro, what are you confused about? Like, stop. Whatever you're doing, whatever any of you motherfuckers are doing where you guys are lying in bed, like, trying to decipher me, just stop that right now, okay? Like, bro is a sooner, right? Bro, I wanted to share you. No, what the fuck is up with you, bro? Sharing implies that you have authority or agency over me, and you don't, bro. What is this? Bro is the main. Bro literally is. Like, why do you guys do this? Genuinely, like, seriously. Sometimes motherfuckers actually do this. Like, it's not just him. I will literally like. There are motherfuckers who would just appear in my like Discord, and then they'll just like tell me things like in the same way. They're like, you know, it's not funny, you know, that you're always ignoring my message because, bro, you literally just asked me like where I live, you know, what age am I, am I religious, am I planning to get married? Like, bro, that's why I ignore your goddamn message, bro. If you ask me something chill like what Roblox games do you like, and I'll be like, yeah, sure, whatever. But bro, you literally just asked me to map out my entire like romantic ideals. Like, what the fuck, bro? What the fuck? I love how your chat jumped on me 5 seconds before you got nuked with mental assault tongue. Yeah, that makes me look great. Okay, listen. Okay, Bumblebee, yeah, low-key, you're right. Sorry, my bad. I forgot that there are worse people out here. He's rage baiting. No, he's not. He's not rage baiting. This was a message from the heart. I see a lot of people that have never touched a boob understand your audience. Bro, but okay, but like, why? I hate you this is why I hate you motherfuckers, okay? Explain this to me. How does not touching a boob in your entire life make you mentally, like, to that level of mental delusionment? Like, hell, I've never touched another female's boob in my entire life.
Oh my god, you're not gonna marry her.
And
But first, let's talk about the inverse, which is the is-ought problem. That's where you let the way that things are in the world determine how you think that they ought to be. You let your factual claim determine your moral claim, determine what you think should be. And there's a subclass of that called the naturalistic fallacy, where your factual claim is about whether something is natural or evolved, and you let that determine whether you think that thing is good or bad. So you could say, well, because X is natural, that means that X is good. Or because Y is evolved, that means it ought to be that way. Or conversely, if something is unnatural, well, if it's not natural, then it must be a bad thing. So let's go through some examples. Here's one. Men and women should be equal. Therefore, innate differences in ability don't exist. Now, you should be able to spot the logical error there, but let's come back to that. I'll give you a few more. Because it is more natural than cigarettes, it's better to smoke pot.
Yeah.
Not only is that a logical fallacy, but it's a grammatic
Doesn't even make
fallacy as
sense.
well. It's a bad sentence. Men and women evolved to be promiscuous, therefore men and women should cheat. And then one that's not super hard, but maybe harder than the others, because we evolved to feel that incest is wrong, incest is wrong. Okay, let's go back to the first one here. We have to identify what's the should statement, what's the moral statement, and then what's the is statement, that is the fact statement. So the should statement is clear. It has the word should in it. Men and women should be equal. That's the way you think the world ought to be. And in this sentence, you're using the way that you think the world ought to be to conclude that that is the way the world actually is. And that's a fallacy. That is an ought-is problem. You're letting the way that you think the world ought to be determine the way you think the world is.
It ought to be, so it is.
What about the next one? Because it is more natural than cigarettes, it's better to smoke pot. What's your moral claim? What's your should statement? Well, you're saying it's better to smoke. It's better to smoke pot. It's better to smoke pot. And your is statement is that, well, it's because pot is more natural than cigarettes. So you're letting
They're both
the
plants.
naturalness of something, the factual naturalness of it, determine
Yeah,
the
dabs
moral
are really
position.
fucking natural,
But
too.
one doesn't follow from the other. And that's why that's an is-ought problem. You're letting your is fallaciously determine your ought. And because we're talking about something that's natural and something that's good, that is a naturalistic fallacy. It's part of the subset of is-ought problems that is a naturalistic fallacy. Okay, the third one. Men and women evolved to be promiscuous, therefore men and women should cheat. The moral claim is that men and women should cheat. That's what they ought to do. And you're using as a basis for why they ought to do that,
Yeah, I
well,
like
because
where-
they evolved that way. But that's not a good enough reason to say
So
that that's
I
how
put
they
this
should
on.
act. Simply because we evolved some way doesn't mean that we ought to do it from a moral perspective. It might explain why we do tend to do it, but it doesn't mean we should do it. So there again, you have a factual claim about something being natural or evolved, determine a moral claim, and so it is again a naturalistic fallacy. Finally, for the last one, because we evolved to feel that incest is wrong, incest is wrong. Incest is wrong being your moral claim. The justification is because we evolved to feel that way. That's not a good
You playing nubs?
enough reason. That is not a good enough reason to say that something is or is not wrong. We talked about this in one of the discussion sections, that
It's a
we
fallacy,
have
though,
we
at the
might
end of
have
the day.
evolved empathy towards those less fortunate than us, and as a result, is that a good enough reason to be good, to help those less fortunate to us? No, that alone is not a good enough reason. We need a moral argument as to why we should help others. We should help those less fortunate. Just because we evolved to feel that way, that's not sufficient justification. And so this again is an is-ought problem, which is a naturalistic fallacy. Now we're going to go over a bunch of these throughout the course. These will appear on the test. We're going to talk about this a lot because these are super important. But for right now, the reason I bring it up is because this determined some of the biggest societal errors that emerged in the wake of evolutionary theory, and that's social Darwinism. Now, this was an idea that was introduced by the British philosopher Herbert Spencer, who was a very prominent philosopher in his day. He actually invented the paperclip. He also coined the term survival of the fittest, which underpins the idea of social Darwinism. But what social Darwinism does is it applies the scientific theory of evolution to how we should organize our policy, our society. Social Darwinism is the normative application of evolutionary ideas to social and public policy. And it is generally characterized by three features. One is the embrace of competition between individuals and classes. In order to realize this idea of the survival of the fittest, if what we see in the law of nature is competition between organisms and that allows for the fit to survive, well, that's what we should make in our society as well. We should have people compete so that the best rise to the top. And what happens to the worst? Well, we should just let them be. Laissez-faire attitudes towards the unfit. Laissez-faire means let them be, don't help them. If we reach out and prevent the poor and the downtrodden and the weak from being crushed underfoot, well, who are we to get in the way of nature? Who are we to prevent nature taking its course and the negative consequences that befall those who are at the bottom of the heap? And then finally, and maybe most troublingly, though these are all pretty troubling, is concerns over differential breeding. If you're trying to make the best society, then you want it to be made up of the best people. As a result, you want the best people to be producing more of the kids. And you want the worst people, the unfit, to produce fewer of the kids. There are a lot of concerns in this era of society being overrun by all the breeding, all the babies that were happening at the bottom rungs of society. Those people are going to overrun our society, and we're going to be on our way down as a result. Now, social Darwinism is, as an ideology, a massive example of the naturalistic fallacy. You take a factual claim.
Okay.
This is mostly true. Maybe the wording is a little
Mass Effect
misleading,
one, that
but
looks
this
really
is mostly true. This is a factual claim about
I like the
evolution,
grass.
but you use it to determine a moral claim that survival of the fittest is good, and then you use that to determine how we should organize our society. So you let your factual claim determine your moral claim. An is-ought problem, and in particular the type of is-ought problem that we're talking about mainly in this course, which is the naturalistic fallacy. And it was an enormously consequential fallacy indeed. This idea of social Darwinism started us on the road down to eugenics. Now, eugenics itself as a term was coined by the statistician and philosopher Francis Galton, who happened to be the half-cousin of Darwin. Galton was obsessed with measuring human variation, how there were individual differences among people. He actually contributed an enormous amount to our understanding of statistics. He discovered the idea of a normal distribution, that is a bell curve. If you measure the heights of a whole bunch of humans, what you'll find, they cluster in a bell curve with most people being the average height. And then as you get more and more extreme to the shorter, taller end, you get fewer and fewer people, so it makes a nice distribution, a bell curve. But he was especially interested in this idea of eminence, which we would today call something like intelligence or competence.
Came out in 2001, eh?
And what he found was that eminence seemed to, through his measurements, run in families. Those who have smart, competent parents tend to be smart and competent themselves and tend to leave smart and competent children. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that. He focused on that being a genetic outcome. And his conclusion, now jumping to the way we should organize our societies, is that, well, if we want to make our society full of eminent people, then those people who are producing eminent children, well, we should incentivize them to have as many children as possible. And those people who are making less eminent children, well, we should maybe discourage them somehow, maybe gently, maybe not, from having children themselves. And that was eugenics, the deliberate hereditary improvement of the race. Eugenics itself, it comes from the prefix "eu" meaning good and genics meaning born or origin, so it's well born. And it comes in two varieties. One is positive eugenics, where you encourage the fit to breed as much as
It's interesting
possible.
you could have a word
So you encourage those
and
who
not know
want to
anything
breed
about its
to do
origin,
so.
its etymology.
Maybe what you do is
And
you
still
take
understand
people
what the
who
word
are
means.
already in eminent pairs and you say, we'll pay you a ton of money or give you a great house to have your kids. Or what you do is you take the most eminent people in your society and you mush them together until they start spitting out children.
That's environment.
Fine. Then there's the more sinister negative eugenics, where instead of incentivizing the good people to breed, you disincentivize the unfit from breeding. And you can do that, maybe you pay them not to breed. That would be the nicest way to do it. There are less nice ways of doing it. Now, to his credit, Darwin was against eugenics entirely. He thought that positive eugenics was impractical because actually Darwin was a bit of a romantic. He was actually quite a romantic. He thought that you can't just try to pair people together because people follow their hearts in choosing their partners. He certainly did. He married one of his cousins, not this cousin, but a different cousin, recognizing the risks that had, but he married her for love. And then negative eugenics, he thought, was morally reprehensible. The mainstream position among intellectuals and politicians, including among progressive liberal politicians, including many feminists, was eugenics was a good thing. It's hard for us to look back now at that history, but here's how some of it went. So early in the century in France, IQ testing, the quantitative measurement of intelligence, had been introduced to measure IQ in children, but very quickly started being adapted for testing adults, and in particular testing racial differences between adults. That started being applied to discussions about immigration policy. And in 1924, in the United States, President Coolidge signed the Immigration Act, which limited immigration from these races deemed to be genetically inferior. That was a policy which stood until it was repealed by Lyndon Johnson in 1965. But there were worse things than just not letting in immigrants, and that was in the form of forced sterilizations. Now, there had been forced sterilization laws on the books in some U.S. states, including Indiana, from pretty early on in the century, but it had been poorly enacted because of legal murkiness. The shift happened with a famous Supreme Court case in 1927 called Buck versus Bell, where Carrie Buck was a pregnant woman who was deemed to be feeble-minded and had a mother who was also deemed to be feeble-minded. The Supreme Court ruled that compulsory non-consensual sterilization was required for the feeble-minded. That's what opened the floodgates. By 1935, 30 states had those types of laws, and they began to be heavily enforced,
Yikes.
particularly in California.
Fucking
Now,
Paul
before we get
Ehrenfest. This dude, huge physicist, had a Down syndrome child. He has feeble-minded children. Einstein, son of schizophrenic, feeble-minded.
on our moral high horse being Canadian
Elon Musk, trans child. I don't know if that child is feeble-minded, but
and morally superior to the United States, there were two provinces which passed around the same time sexual sterilization laws in Canada. One of them was Alberta, and I'll give you guys one guess as to what the second one was, but its name rhymes with the name of our university. Those laws were on the books until the 70s. In the end, more than 60,000 Americans were forcibly sterilized. Again, most of them in California. Another 3,000 in Alberta, several hundred in BC. Adolf Hitler actually learnt about and sent his scientists to learn about sterilization from American scientists during the 30s. So you can sadly draw a direct line from Darwin through the American eugenics movement to Hitler and his final solution in the Holocaust.
God bless
And
America.
it's that ugly history that formed the backdrop of why people have such problems with evolutionary thinking, and particularly evolutionary psychology thinking. It was the horrible extent that eugenics had reached that prompted this backlash in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and all the way carrying up to today, within academia and in culture more largely. Theorists rejected biological explanations, and instead took a blank slatist approach where they emphasized that everything had to be determined by cultural learning. They swung the pendulum away from the type of thinking that had preceded them and that had led to the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust. So it's against that background that sociobiology, the predecessor of evolutionary psychology, and then later evolutionary psychology emerge. And many in and out of academia are perhaps understandably thus suspicious that there is a similar political agenda behind evolutionary psychology as we saw in the past. And this has led to a lot of resistance to evolutionary psychology's claims. But there's another side to this. So whereas the political appropriation of evolutionary science stains its history, the denial of the science because of political motivations also has its dark side. The Americans were motivated to reinforce a competitive capitalist status quo. The Germans were motivated to reinforce an essentialist racial hierarchy. But in the Soviet Union, there was a different ideology. There was an attempt to reinforce an idea of the working man, of the proletariat, and that led them to a different relationship with evolutionary thinking. Whereas the Americans and the Germans allowed their science to guide their politics, in the Soviet Union, they allowed the politics to shape the science. And here's where we have to introduce one last character, and that's the agronomist Trofim Lysenko, also known as the worst scientist in history. Now, Lysenko was born to a peasant family, but he worked his way up to become an agricultural scientist. Now, at the time, most in that field were experimenting with Mendelian genetics and influenced by Darwinian theories of evolution, but Lysenko rejected all of that in favor of his own view of genetics, which was more ideologically aligned with communist philosophies. So he downplayed capitalist sounding things like natural selection. He downplayed heredity and competition, and instead he upplated the more communist sounding things like genes providing mutual assistance for each other. He also made outrageous and fraudulent claims about the effects that his theories had on actual food production. The consequence is that his own proletariat background, his own working man story, coupled with telling them exactly what they wanted to hear, earned the favor of the Soviet politicians, and in particular Stalin. And so he was promoted higher and higher up until he was given the position of the top geneticist in the country, a position that he used to silence dissent, silence other theories of genetics, which happen to be the correct theories of genetics, and actually silence and disappear many of his critics, as well as just people with different scientific ideas. Now, the consequence of that, the consequence that the most powerful man behind genetics and agricultural policy in the country had scientifically groundless ideas, baseless, incorrect ideas, meant that there were massive food shortages. The fact that these were also picked up in Maoist China just compounded the scope of the problem. The consequence is that without all that food, there was mass starvation. Tens of millions of people died. That was the consequence of politically motivated science denial, a tragedy of really unimaginable scope and suffering. So, what do we take from this? Well, first, we have to guard ourselves against the naturalistic fallacy. We have to make sure we don't conflate facts and values. They don't, on their own, necessitate each other. If you're going to have a moral position, it has to be based on moral argument, not simply that things are a certain way. And also, and this is explained fairly nicely in the Stuart Williams reading for this week, is you can't let your view of what is true be shaped by the way you wish things ought to be, because that gets in the way of actually accomplishing what you want. You need to have a realistic view of the world in order to actually achieve the goals that are motivated by your morals. Second, science often gets it wrong. The whole history of science is it being wrong and being corrected, and so we need to be open to the criticism in a way that Lysenko wasn't. But finally, we have to beware of criticism with an interest, with a non-scientific motivation. That's the story of this lecture. There are many political agendas that are always circulating. We need to judge science on the basis of the science, removed from those moral or metaphysical or political objections.
That's all right. Oh shit. So everything's just a fucking bit of both, honestly. There's not many things where it's intentionally polarized or like intensely polarized. So that makes sense. Also, I was thinking about how the history of America and the Soviet Union, the two greatest powers in the world in the 20th century, and how they ended up looking. We got Putin on one side and Trump on the other. And then you got everything else, every other country was just sitting there watching and being like, you know what, I'm going to take that, no, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to take that, I'm going to leave that, I'm going to leave the rest.
Yeah, because I never really had like friends starting this. Like I was no one growing up in high school, so like I wasn't worried about my friends finding out what I was doing. You know, I just started it because I didn't really have friends, so who cared? But so that's my pro, I guess. Because I never really had like.
Why does she have friends? Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna go to thank you. Thanks, Brog. I'll be back on at like 6:30ish, 6:37, 7 between 6:30 and 7, 6:30, 7:45, 2 6:40, 6:5, 6 7.